I will. I'll do it from back here because I'm live streaming. Hello, everyone. Just inviting everyone to take your seats. Friendly reminder to please turn off your cell phones. I just have a couple of announcements. So for September, we only have two of in the headlines, Mr. Hershey's lectures. We have one today, and then we have another one on the 28th because of the Jewish holidays. We invite you to put that in your calendar because we don't want you to show up expecting a lecture next week. For this coming month, we have a few things coming up. We have a concert. If you haven't picked up the highlights, they are outside the door at the table. Please pick them up on your way out. But I will tell you about some exciting things coming up. We have a concert. Les Arrivants present Towards the Light on the 16th, which is at 6:30 p.m. right here in the auditorium. We're also participating in the Montreal Intercultural Storytelling Festival, The Girl and the Dog and Other Shape-Shifting Tales, which will be taking place here on the 21st, which is the Tuesday at 2 o'clock. We also have a tribute to jazz legend Oliver Jones coming up on Sunday, the 26th at 2 o'clock. This Friday, we have a film for Friday afternoon at the movies. The film is called The Materialists. And so that's it for me. Here, without further ado, is In the Headlines.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me well? And I want to thank, beside thanking all of you who made an effort to come, I'd like to thank people who are watching on Zoom. Hopefully, it's because they have good reasons not to be able to come. So I really appreciate you looking in for an hour, taking an hour of your time to follow current events. You know, the world is hasn't been more interesting in a long time. We'll start with that. But before that, I want to wish people a happy Shana Tova, a new year, 5786. And you know, when you ask, well, what happened 5,786 years ago? People who are believers, they say, well, the world was created at that time. But of course, we know that the world wasn't created at that time. The world was somehow created, and it's not sure exactly how, about 8 billion years ago, which is a big difference from 5,700 years ago. And when, you know, I personally know and respect very deeply people who do believe, and I say, well, for example, all the fossils that are there in the world that are millions of years ago, like, how did they get there? So he said, well, God created the fossils in place. Like, in other words, these weren't animals that once lived. They're just fossils that somehow ended up there 5,000 years ago. But you say, no, but they're millions of years old. Like, in other words, my thing is if you allow science to control your lives every single day, in other words, you drive a car that has brakes. The brakes, you put your foot on the pedal and the car stops. It isn't a miracle that happened. That's a scientific invention that used logic, mathematics, physics, chemistry to create brakes. So if you run your entire life based on that collective knowledge, how is it that you have amnesia when it comes to fossils or when it comes to the age of the world? In my way of thinking, the two kind of don't add up. And of course, when I was 12 years old, and going to Jewish school, and I would ask the teacher or rabbi about that. They said, maybe they counted the years differently in those days. Well, yeah, maybe, except that they didn't, because the Babylonians were expert astronomers. They counted the world to be the year exactly 365 days. They missed by a couple of hours in their calculations, which is amazing considering that they didn't have computers, they didn't have telescopes, they didn't have any modern tools whatsoever. But anyway, let's leave that aside. So just a thought that could drift into one part of you and go out the other. I think that the event of the week that I would like to speak about is the Canada's recognition of the Palestinian state. And of course, this encompasses so many different aspects that it's hard to know where to begin. And one can ask, well, A, what does it mean? B, what effect does it have? Why now? What does it hope to accomplish in the short run and in the long run? I mean, these are just some questions that immediately come to mind. And of course, is this a symptom? In other words, did Canada just decide to do this by itself? Or obviously, we know that this is just part of a whole movement or group of countries that have managed or decided to do this all the same thing at the same time. And what's the thinking of all those countries together, put together? So, this is part of the ongoing struggle in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I think it's quite a remarkable turn of events. So let's just ask why was this done, and why was it done now? Let's start with that. The recognition of a Palestinian state by Canada is a reflection of what people are thinking in the Western world today. So if you look up polls are just been published today. I just read another one saying more people for the first time sympathize with the Palestinians than the Israelis. In the United States, more than half of young Republicans sympathize more with the Palestinians than with the Israelis. So clearly, the recognition of Palestine doesn't come out of the blue. It's a kind of a recognition of what the people in their countries, especially opinion makers, young people, educated people, especially those people who in a certain way their opinions count for more than the average person. It's a reflection of what these people are thinking. Now, of course, you could ask, well, why are these people thinking this? And then we can get into a discussion about that. So one aspect is this idea of just reflecting what people are thinking. The second aspect is that the recognition is a kind of we'll call it a weapon that's used against the Israeli government for disapproving of what the Israeli government is doing in the Middle East today. So in other words, let's go back and say this, okay? Let's pretend that awful massacre of October the 7th, let's say it happened, okay? And let's say the Israelis did nothing about it. Would all of the countries that recognize Palestine then say, oh, you did such a great thing, we're going to reward you by recognizing you? So clearly that isn't so. So the recognition then is because of Israel's response to that massacre and how it responded. Now remember one thing, that Israel took 2 weeks to do any kind of military response. In those 2 weeks, there were already people saying, saying, oh, the Palestinians did a great act of resistance. These are people who hate Israel, probably hate Jews as well, and are looking to celebrate what was the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. So there were voices like that. There weren't a lot of them, but there were plenty of them. Now, Israel did hit back. But in the month following the attacks, Netanyahu gave a speech and he said, our goal is to destroy Hamas and free all the hostages. And within a couple of months, we're going to do it. Of course, that was not true. To this day, 2 years later, 2 years minus 1 week, Hamas is not destroyed and the hostages aren't freed. So according to the Israeli plan, this whole war is in a certain way a failure. It's a failure to achieve the 2 goals that he set out for himself at the very beginning. Now, we know, of course, that in these 2 years, almost all of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, but not all. Certainly the pictures that you see are of destroyed buildings, but they don't show pictures of non-destroyed buildings. But satellite photographs taken from the air show more than 60% of all the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. And somewhere, we don't know the number of people killed because only the Hamas publishes numbers. The numbers they publish are around 66,000. Israel figures that they've killed 22,000 Hamas soldiers. So it still leaves 40,000 or maybe half of that who are civilians who are killed. Now, one of the big problems, what I feel one of the big criticisms that I would level at Israel is that they didn't allow foreign correspondents into Gaza to see what's happening. So once you don't do that, then the only reporting you get, the only pictures you get, the only video you get are from Hamas news people. And obviously, they're going to show the situation in the most favorable light for their side and the least favorable light for the Israeli side. So I think that Israel has suffered a huge, enormous, incalculable loss in public relations by allowing Hamas to tell the story. And because Hamas has told the story, and because they're so skilled at, we'll call it manipulation of news, the whole world has no choice but to believe them because they don't see anything else. So to me, this is one of the biggest failures of the time. Now, Israel has said, well, the reason we don't allow foreign correspondents in is because it's too dangerous. Yeah, but it's up to the foreign correspondents to decide if it's too dangerous for them. Now, it also may be that Israel doesn't want foreign correspondents to see what they're actually doing. That's another good reason. So then, of course, they have to weigh the advantages of not telling people what's happening with the disadvantages of allowing Hamas to tell people what's happening. Be that as it may, the situation is today that in the Western world, most people are now favoring the Palestinians and not the Israelis. That's the fact. Now, what does that lead to? Well, it leads to a movement of boycotting Israel, of cancellation of multi-million-dollar of defense contracts that Spain just canceled with Israel. I was just reading today that Colombia, which bought all their weapons from Israel, is now buying 0 weapons from Israel. Western countries like Great Britain have said they're not going to send certain weapons to Israel. Lots of other countries in Western Europe that were supplying Israel with some types of weapons have said we're not going to do it because what they say is we don't want to be complicit in the in the fight against civilians in Gaza. The boycotts are even more severe when it comes to sports. The European Football League, the European League, is going to vote on whether to expel Israel from their ranks. This would be a tremendous blow to Israel because soccer is so important there. And because Asia and the Arab countries do not recognize Israel, Israel was given the privilege of competing in the World Soccer events in the European League, even though Israel is not physically in Europe. So if Europe kicks them out, that means they will have nowhere to compete. The cycling team that's set up by Sylvan Adams, our great benefactor here, was barred from participating in the Italian cycling race. The Eurovision, which has a song competition of the year, has decided not to allow Israel to compete because other countries said if Israel is in, we're out. Chess tournaments, Israel has been barred from competing in chess tournaments. 1,200 arts people in the United States signed a petition saying they're not going to participate in any Israeli film activity. So there is an effect on this. Now you might say, who cares? You might say, doesn't affect Israel at all. Netanyahu, in response to all this, he gave a speech. He said that Israel should be like Sparta. You know what Sparta is or was? It's a city in Greece in the days of the sort of city-states of Greece. And Sparta said, we are so strong, we don't want any allies. We don't need any allies. We're going to manage by ourselves. Because if we have allies, it means we owe them something. And we don't want to owe anybody to anything to anybody. Of course, in the end, Sparta was defeated because they had no allies. So this speech of Netanyahu was condemned very quickly by historians who said he didn't know what he was talking about. And the whole world needs allies. Now, Mr. Trump, the president, he may feel that the United States doesn't need any allies. That's how he feels. But we have to remember one thing. The United States is here, and it's rich and strong. And Israel is in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies. So, which country is more likely to need allies? You know what I mean? It's pretty obvious. Of course, the results of all this are that the Israeli economy has been tremendously affected. Today, the news was published that Israel is going to run its biggest deficit ever, meaning that it's borrowing money to run the war. And even more disappointing or distressing is the fact that 85,000 Israelis have left the country this year, far, far more than people coming in. So for the first time, Israel is losing population. It's all because of this war, which, has been, we'll say it's been cast on Israel, but it certainly has not been well managed or well explained. Now, I don't know how many of you watched Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations. It was an amazing speech. It was a fantastic speech. He is a great speaker, a great presenter, and looking over the speech, it's hard to disagree with almost anything he said. So what did he say? He said, sorry, wow, that was a bang. Of course, he started off by saying that Hamas committed the massacre and war crimes on October 7th. So he put the war crimes idea on Hamas. And I hate to read the press, and it says, well, that the Hamas killed 1,200 people on the day of the attack, and Israel has killed 66,000 people in Gaza. So right away you say, okay, well, they killed, look how many more, they killed 50 times more people. But my problem is the word killed. That's the first problem. Because Hamas killed them, all right, but they murdered them. They massacred them. Israel didn't murder or massacre anybody in Gaza. They were killed, sure, as a result of the activity and the bombings and the war. But killing and murdering are not the same thing. And the world is sort of it's very easy to take the two figures and compare them and say, well, who's the strong, who's more at fault? Both sides are at fault, but who's more at fault? Well, it's got to be Israel because they killed more people. So that's one thing he said. He said that Israel has faced enemies from all around them. Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, the Houthis, Iraqi, Al-Qaeda, the Syrians, and all of these people are enemies of the West. So his message was to say, who has called for death to America? All these people. We in Israel are fighting your battle. That if it wasn't for us, these elements would end up attacking you more, but we're drawing away all their strength because we're attacking them. So he tried to use this as a kind of a lesson to the world that if it's not for Israel, you're going to be next. Of course, that isn't true, because these are regional and local fights. Hezbollah is not interested in going to overthrow the British or the French or the German governments, etc. But what is true is that these movements are definitely anti-Western and definitely anti-American. But saying something and doing something are two very different things. Then he said that the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. And those people who are advocating for a two-state solution don't really understand that the Palestinians don't want that. This is an argument that is historically very correct, because the Palestinians have had a chance in 1947 under the United Nations partition plan to have their own state, and they refused it. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, the Palestinians were offered their own state in the West Bank and Gaza minus Jerusalem, and they refused it. In the meetings between Rabin and Arafat, sponsored by President Clinton, roughly the same conclusion was made. And it's something that people people today, if you held a poll and you asked Palestinians, would you accept to have a two-state solution? The majority would say yes. That's what they want, because they can't have a one-state solution. What they would really want and what they would accept are not the same thing. So I think that point has to be made pretty clear. So let me just finish with Netanyahu's speech, then we'll talk about Mr. Abbas's speech at the United Nations also. He says that the proof of this is that the books, the school books and textbooks and everything used in schools in Gaza and the West Bank still talk about the Israelis as foreigners, as colonialists, and people who don't belong. Mr. Abbas is still paying pensions to families of people who are in Israel, Israeli jails who've killed Israelis. On October the 7th, the Palestinians celebrated the attack on Israel in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. So there is an attempt today to try to differentiate or separate Hamas from the Palestinians. But in actual fact, Hamas are the Palestinians. There was an election, only one, in 2007, a fair election in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip in 2006, I should say. And Hamas won the election. Hamas got more votes than the Palestinian Fatah movement, but they got more votes in Gaza and fewer votes in the West Bank. And so they ended up taking over Gaza, and Fatah ended up taking over the West Bank. So it's not credible to say that Hamas has no popular support and that they're some kind of a, we'll call them an Islamic militia without any roots in the country. Now, today in Gaza, it's true Hamas's support is way down because, of course, the whole place has been destroyed because of them. And everybody in Gaza knows it's because of them. They know it because they saw all the rockets going off before the attack on October 7th. They all know about the attack on October 7th. So they all know Hamas is responsible for the destruction in Gaza. But of course, Israel did it. So Israel has no sympathy in Gaza because of obviously what they did. You can't expect the people in Gaza to sympathize with Israel because Israel's bombing them every day. He said Israel is not committing genocide. You know, this big attack on Israel for committing genocide, to me, is certainly hypocritical, is a nice word to say about it. Well, what is genocide? We know the definition of genocide. Geno means a people, and side means killing. But we've had genocides, and the Holocaust was not the only genocide. People should realize that the Holocaust was not the only genocide. There was an Armenian genocide in 1915-16. The Hutus in Rwanda, there was a genocide of the Hutus just in the 1980s, where 400,000 Hutus were killed in 3 months. I mean, the rate of killing was more than what the Nazis did to the Jews. So those are a few examples of genocides that have happened in our time. But genocide means the attempt to remove or kill off or make disappear an entire group of people. And clearly, that's not Israel's aim in Gaza at all. Because for sure, if they wanted to do genocide in Gaza, there wouldn't end up being the same number of Gazans today as there were in October 7th. In fact, more, because the number of births exceeds the number of deaths. And the number of people leaving Gaza isn't all that great. So there's just about the same or more numbers in Gaza today as there were on October 7, 2023. So where's the genocide? And Israel says, look, every time we want to do a big operation, we're warning people to move somewhere. If we want to kill them all, why would we bother telling them to move? So this is really a hypocritical, and even I would call it an anti-Semitic act to take something that happened to the Jews and reflect it back on them to say, now you're doing it. You know, that's, you know, of all the accusations that are put on Israel, some of which are more, we'll call them believable than others, the idea of genocide is definitely not credible. Unless you say genocide means just killing a lot of people. If you say genocide means killing a lot of people, well, then, you know, you could have, you know, any war could be blamed for genocide in that case. They say Israel is not starving the people of Gaza because lots of food is moved into Gaza. And, you know, when you see pictures that Hamas shows pictures, you don't see people who are looking as if they're starving. Netanyahu says that Hamas has stolen more than 85% of all the food that goes into Gaza, and they keep it and they sell it and they use it. And you know, that's the cause of food shortages in Gaza. Let me see what else he said. And he said, of course, that, you know, if they were so interested in the people, why wouldn't they let them in the tunnels? You know, when Israel's doing an action, and the Gazan population has never been allowed in the tunnels. And he says Israel wants peace with security. And he said, of course, that anti-Israel actions are in part of historical anti-Semitism. So the idea is he's trying to link what's happening in Gaza with historical anti-Semitism in Europe. And what he said was, you know, in Europe, the Jews couldn't fight back. Europe and the Middle East, all throughout the centuries, Jews couldn't fight back. Now in Israel, when the Jews are attacked, they are fighting back. So he's trying to, in a way, remind Europe of the guilt that they've had, especially Europe, I should say, over historical anti-Semitism that goes back to you know, the Roman times, we'll say. Now, so that's what he said. It's very difficult to disagree with anything, any of those points. But there's things that he didn't say. There's things that he didn't say. What he didn't say is, what's your plan? What's your plan for the Palestinians? What's your plan for Gaza? What's your plan for the West Bank? In other words, when people say, oh, the West Bank and Gaza are occupied territories, and Israel says, no, they're not occupied. Well, that, of course, depends on your definition of occupied. But you've got 4 million people living there who don't have the same rights as the Israelis have. They don't have a right to vote. They don't have a right to choose their own representatives. They don't have a parliament, either part of Israel's parliament or a separate parliament. So in that case, well, what would you call it if it's not occupation? These are people that don't have rights, and you have all the control over them, especially in the West Bank. So he didn't say what is Israel plan to do to bring an end to or to solve this issue of Palestine, which has been going on since 1948. So he didn't lay out any kind of a solution in that way. The other great, so there, I would say there's two elements of criticism of Israel. And one of the elements I spoke about, which is the way they're carrying on the war in Gaza. I think just as valid a criticism is what's happening in the West Bank, in you know, that territory. So Israel, of course, conquered the West Bank in 1967. Slowly but surely, they put up settlements, Jewish settlements in the West Bank, which had a population of about 2.25 million people. And today, more than 600,000 Jews have moved into the West Bank, a lot of them with the aim of preventing the emergence of a Palestinian state. So the idea being, if you scatter Jewish settlements all over the West Bank, there's no contiguous territory to make a state there. And this has been part of the government's policy now for certainly as long as this government has been in power. But even more disturbing are the attacks on innocent Palestinian civilians in the West Bank by hooligans who seem to have the permission to do whatever they want. So that's including killing, stealing, burning, cutting down of olive trees, all of which is documented. And many of these Palestinians are American citizens. So that was on TV just the other night. There was an interview with 3 American Palestinians who've been attacked by Israelis without any consequence. The Minister of Public Security said that there is no such thing as a Jewish terrorist. Any Jew who gets arrested for attacking a Palestinian must be freed from prison right away, and no charges brought against them. So if that's the way that these people are treated, when people see pictures of this, and again, it's a free country, so people can go in and take pictures. What's the world supposed to think when they see these helpless Palestinians being attacked by Jewish settlers without any comeback, without any punishment? In fact, with ministers in the government saying we're proud of what they're doing, and we hope these Palestinians all get the lesson and move away. So, in other words, the sympathy with the Palestinians comes from what Israelis are doing. It doesn't come from what the Palestinians are doing. Um, uh, let's see here. So let's talk a touch about what what Abbas said at the United Nations. So he said a lot of things which are interesting. He says, number one, we recognize Israel. Now that was part of the agreement that was made with Rabin, where the Palestinians for the first time said we recognize Israel. But of course, the word recognize has a couple of different meanings. What the Palestinians recognize is that Israel is a strong, independent country. What they don't want to recognize is that Israel is a Jewish state and a homeland of the Jewish people. The Arab political parties in Israel say, we would like Israel, we recognize that we are proud to be Israeli citizens, we want to be Israeli citizens, but we want there to be a kind of a state of all its citizens, meaning that everybody who lives in Israel as an Israeli citizen should have the same rights. In fact, by law, this isn't the case. Israel has legislated that Israel is the Jewish national state. The nation state law was passed saying that only the Jews in Israel are the sort of founding people of the country. That not only does Israel have to reflect the fact that it's a Jewish state in every part of its existence, meaning Hebrew being the official language, the Israeli Jewish calendar being official, the Jewish holidays being official, but of course that only Jews are allowed to bring relatives and people to come to live in the country, and non-Jews are not allowed to do that. So there's clearly then a distinction in law between Jews and non-Jews in Israel. And in practice, the distinctions are even bigger, meaning that Arab municipalities don't get the same amount of money. They're not allowed to expand their municipal boundaries. Arab schools are not given the same amount of money. There isn't an Arab university in Israel, et cetera, et cetera. When an Arab film just won the equivalent of the Israeli Academy Awards, the government said, well, we have to defund this prize because Arabs have no place in our country. So this is the mentality of the Israeli government, and the extremists in that government is, to sum it up, the only good Arab is a dead Arab. And that's basically how they think. And everything else sort of follows from that. And this applies to Arabs in Israel and Arabs who are Palestinians in the West Bank. One of the government officials said, you know what? I don't like the idea of Israeli Arabs voting in our elections, because there are elections. What we should do is give them a loyalty test. And only if they pass the loyalty test should they be given the right to vote. Of course, the loyalty test should be given to the ultra-Orthodox in Israel who refuse to serve in the army, and who denigrate the state at any chance they can, and who are as disloyal a citizen as you could get as far as a citizen's obligations are concerned. Anyway, that's part of another story. To go back to Abbas's speech, he said, we recognize Israel. We condemn what happened on October the 7th. We want a state on the 1967 borders without Hamas. We feel that Israel wants to annex all of Palestine and kick out the Palestinians. And he said, he mentioned, of course, the Israeli, what he called a genocide in Gaza and the violence in the West Bank. So you have two different addresses to the UN reflecting two different viewpoints of what the same situation is in the Middle East. And both sides are partly right and partly wrong. So there's no clear cut, There's no clear-cut kind of good guys and bad guys in this whole story, which makes it, so complicated and so difficult. So Trump came up with a plan, and a half-decent plan, to end the conflict. And if this plan succeeds, I think he really does deserve to get the Nobel Prize, because after 2 years of fighting, no one has been able to force the two sides to accept the same set of conditions and the same set of agreements. And the agreements include all hostages have to be released. Israel has to release prisoners, including hundreds of people who were convicted of murder. Hamas has to be disarmed. A ceasefire and withdrawal have to take place. Israel has to remove its troops gradually from the Gaza Strip. The food has to come into the Gaza Strip supplied by the United Nations and not run by Israel. The Arab states are supposed to put money in to rebuild Gaza. Democratic elections have to be held. The people in Gaza cannot be kicked out because some Israeli politicians on the right, again, part of Netanyahu's coalition, said we should pay them to leave. Let's negotiate with different countries to see who will accept how many. And what we'll do is once they're all gone, then we'll put the Jews back into Gaza. So this is the aim of some of Netanyahu's coalition. Israel cannot attack Qatar, which they did. And Netanyahu just apologized to the Prince of Qatar. And basically that's the plan. And that a non-Palestinian authority and a non-Hamas authority would be set up to run the Gaza Strip. In other words, some technocrats, some citizens who are not currently politically involved would be the ones to run the country, along with Arab states who are friendly to Israel, like the United Arab Emirates and maybe Jordan and Egypt, would take part in the running of the Gaza Strip. So that's the plan. Netanyahu says he accepts. Oops. That's only water. Netanyahu said he accepted the plan because the amount of pressure on him is huge. Remember one thing, and this is a super important thing. Israel is a 100% democratic state. Israel has never missed an election despite being in wars, since its creation. Every election in Israel has been basically fair, according to certainly any measure that you could possibly measure. And right now, the public opinion is very strongly against Netanyahu, strongly against how the war is being carried out, strongly in favor of a ceasefire and the release of all the hostages. Polls are saying if the election were held today, Netanyahu's coalition would go down from 64 out of 120 to somewhere around 52 out of 120. And 52 obviously is not half of 120. So his days are numbered. An election has to be held by October 2026. So it's very possible that Netanyahu has more incentive to accept an agreement like this, which goes against what his right-wing members want, because he says, look, if I'm going to get kicked out, I might as well go down for having done something decent for once in my life, rather than just holding on to the last instant and then getting kicked out. And by the way, Netanyahu did a lot of good things. I don't want to make fun of him. About the best thing he did was the reform of the Israeli economy, which he did in his first term. It really turned Israel into a wealthy country. Israel's standard of living today is roughly at par with Italy's. It's roughly at par with a middle European country. So that is a remarkable achievement. But this war has taken a strong toll on the economy. Now, the Israeli stock market, by the way, is doing better than the US stock market. But a stock market is not a total reflection of an economy. Tourism in Israel is one of the more important sectors, and it's way down. There was a boycott of airlines going to Israel, which is still has not been revived. Israel is under siege, and the people feel it. Some people react to a siege by saying, we're just going to be tougher. And some people say, the hell with it. Why should I bother with all this? I have a cousin in Toronto. Let's see if I can go there for a while. So I think I just outlined the basic kind of parameters of this whole business. Um, Maybe we should circle back to Canada again and say that the recognition of Palestine was done in coordination with lots of other countries. So 10 countries, including the UK, France, Portugal, Canada, Australia, and a bunch of other ones, all decided to recognize Palestine. Now, the logic would be like, first of all, Palestine isn't a country at this point. So how could you recognize something that doesn't exist? That's one point. The second point is, even if you were going to recognize the Palestine as a country, why not do it after there's an agreement made between the two sides to settle some or all of their problems? That would be an encouragement for both sides not to break their agreement. Like I said, that I think that the push is coming from below, from the people and I think that, by the way, that the recognition is also a kind of a warning to Netanyahu to say, look, you're losing all the friends you have. You better change your behavior. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And then there's another factor that maybe you haven't thought of. It's a way of the world getting back at Trump. Because if Trump says, I'm sticking with Israel to the end, well, the enemy, what's it called? The enemy of my friend is a friend of mine type of thing. So in other words, if Trump is saying so much things pro-Israel and the world can't stand him, maybe they should all stand together to go against what he is supporting. That would be one possibility. Now, an even more devious possibility is that Trump worked all this out with these other countries to say, look, if you show your recognition of Palestine, and I am pushing Israel to accept this peace accord, maybe by you doing that, it tells Israel what they have to lose, and they'll be more willing to accept my peace accord. So this could be something cooked up between Trump and all the other countries, which of course he's not smart enough to do that. So I would dismiss that right away. But it's just a thought that came into my head. That's all. That's all I could say. Um, uh, it's Israel spends so much money on public relations, and yet their actions in all ways, I'm not just talking about the Gaza war, but in all many other things, just seem to undermine all of the public relations that they have. And I'll finish off with the last point, which is that the situation in the Middle East, of course, has been reflected on Jews all around the world. Now, why is that? Because Israel is and calls itself the Jewish state, the only Jewish state, and the homeland of the Jewish people. So therefore, if Israel calls itself a Jewish state, and if Israel is committing actions which the people don't like, well, by association, the Jews around the world are associated with these negative actions. And then people who really don't like them will then, show their attacks on Jews. So they would say, well, is anti-Semitism the same as anti-Zionism? And that this is, this is a question of the day. And anti-Zionism, let's put it like this. that people who say that Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state, Zionism means that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, and Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. That's what Zionism means. You know, it'll be 1897, 1997. Yeah, the movement started in 1897, so the Zionist movement has been around since then. The idea of establishing a Jewish state or Jewish homeland in the historical Jewish homeland. So if you claim the Jews in Israel have no connection to each other, that's being anti-Semitic. It's not just being anti-Zionist, because you know, all you have to do is go to the Israel Museum and see the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you realize, written in Hebrew, that the Jewish people originated in Israel, that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, that the Jews are the indigenous population of Israel, but they were kicked out by the Romans and others over the years and decided to go back to their original homeland. If you don't accept that narrative, then you're not just being anti-Zionist, you're being anti-Semitic. Okay? But at the same time, it's of course legitimate to criticize Israel's actions, because more than half of Israelis are doing the same thing. So if you say, I don't like what Israel is doing, that's not being anti-Semitic. That's just being anti-Israeli government. The unfortunate part is that Netanyahu and the Israeli government says, not only is it our job to defend the country, it's our job to defend Jews all around the world. And the irony is that by his actions, he's causing the Jews all around the world to be attacked and to be threatened and to be, you know, and to live in a much weaker situation than they would have had his actions not been what they are. So that's the, you know, that's the long and the short of it. Just checking time here. Okay. I was given warning last week, you know, don't go over late because, you know, of course the staff and we have to clear the room and na. And, you know, usually I take questions until the end of the question. So I just have to tell you that they want me to be a little more strict on that matter. So I have given you a rough approach of how at least I would see things, and I would like to hear what you have to say. I'm sure you all have lots and lots of opinions on this. So let's start with Madame over here. Maybe, do you want to use a microphone? Because, you know, it might be an idea for people to hear what you have to say. And then give it back.
I will. You left out a very important facet, in my opinion, of your presentation. And the important aspect is that what was happening in Gaza would negate the possibility of ever having the land to establish a Palestinian state. And I really believe that unless something is established where there are partners that maintain the peace, there'll never be peace for Israel. We'll just go in vicious circles and it will happen again and again. And Netanyahu is a person who is perpetrating the fighting for his own political reasons. And I want to bring up an issue. About a month ago, Anthony attended a conference in Boston of Jewish legislators from around the world, literally around the world. And Anthony said every one of them had the same problem. Their leaders, be them presidents, be them prime ministers, whatever title they carried, they all felt the same way. It was Netanyahu was forcing them to turn against Israel because of their intense dislike for this man. So I think we're forgetting the fact that what Israel is doing negates the possibility of maybe one day having peace with a separate Palestinian and Israeli country.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, when Madame said Anthony, she's referring to Anthony Housefather, and that's Anthony's mother. So for those of you who don't know, she's famous by extension. It's not, I didn't neglect to say that, but what I did not say, and what I'm going to say now, is that this attack on the attack of October the 7th and the massacre of all those people and the taking of hostages and the sympathy that this action found among the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza has really removed the possibility of a peace between the two sides for, I would say, a generation. That Israel has always had and still has a division between people who would like to compromise and make peace with the Palestinians and those people who say we would rather get rid of all the Palestinians. And this attack has changed the balance of what people think in Israel. So the vast majority today of Israelis, and Israeli Jews, by the way, are 80% of the country. So the vast majority of these people feel that there will never be peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis because you can't trust the Palestinians. Because if they could pull off that type of action with the support of their own people, then how could anybody ever trust them? And Netanyahu said as much. He said, you can't have imagine Al-Qaeda putting a state up in New York 1 mile from the World Trade Center, because obviously a Palestinian state would border on Israel. The Israeli airport would be within 2 miles of a Palestinian state as the crow flies. So that was his point. The point that you made, and the point that's reflected by the people that the Jewish legislatures and many Jews living abroad understand that we are being put into a position that we don't want to be put into, and that the actions in the Middle East are something that affects our own personal security and safety. Because people are not going to go to Israel to take out their anger on Israel. They'll just come to a synagogue and burn it down or kill the people the way they did it in Pittsburgh or in Poway, California, or in putting a bullet through the Jewish schools here in Montreal or in Toronto. So it is true that we are kind of like helpless bystanders in this whole conflict, and it makes us very uncomfortable and very insecure. Polls taken showing a rising amount of anti-Semitism around the whole Western world, including in Canada. In other words, do you think Jews are good people? Do you like them? Blah, 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 all these type of questions. And the numbers are who support us are going down. And it's only because of the actions in Israel and in the Middle East. It's not because of any particular actions that are being done by the Jewish communities abroad. Now, we would have to say, and polls do show this, that the vast majorities of Jews who do live abroad feel a connection to Israel. There are some who don't. There are some, anti-Zionist Jews. There definitely are some of those. But they're loud as they are. They don't represent the majority of what most Jews feel in the world. The fact is now that about half of the Jews in the world live in Israel, and the other half don't live in Israel. Of the half that don't live in Israel, practically all of them live in the United States. So if we're talking about population numbers, we have in Israel about somewhere around 8.5 million Jews. In the United States, somewhere around 7 million. And somewhere around 1 million in all the rest of the world. 1.5 million. France being number 3 with about 500,000, and Canada being number 4 with about 370,000. So it just tells you that between the US and Israel, pretty well you've covered about 90% of all the Jews in the world. The fact is that we are very uncomfortable with this whole situation because we have no way to act to change it. And so that's what makes the situation so kind of nerve-wracking, we'll call it. Yes, there will be a change. How will there be a change in this? The change will come when elections come in Israel and Mr. Netanyahu and his right-wing gang get kicked out of power. Then what will happen is that you will just, not even by doing things, but by saying things, the new government will say things that are more moderate and that will kind of bring the balance, move the needle back toward being more accepting of Israel. I think that's the way things are going and will have to go. I just want to remind you that one of the members of the coalition, so the coalition government in Israel consists of Mr. Netanyahu's Likud party, which is a nationalist party, which has always been a nationalist party. But he's got two parties to the right, or even more nationalistic than the Likud party, one of which is called the Jewish Power Party. Well, that speaks for itself, Jewish Power Party. And the other party is called the Religious Zionist Party, which represents all the settlers and their whole movement. And the other coalition partners are the ultra-Orthodox Jews who have no interest in anything that goes on anywhere outside of their own community. And what they say is, give us the money, give us exemptions to serve in the army, allow us to impose religious law on as many people as we can, and we don't care about a budget, we don't care about foreign relations, we don't care about anything. And that's his government. So clearly it's the most right-wing government in Israeli history. And Israel is the most divided that it's ever been in Israeli history. And just to contrast that, the United States has the most right-wing government in its history, and it's the most divided it's ever been in its history since the Civil War. So the two leaders have a lot in common, and the two countries have a lot in common, all to the negative. The United States at this point is not fighting a war for having been attacked, but that's the only difference. So someone else must have a comment, question, anything? Let's see. I'm looking, all sitting so quietly. I'm sure you must disagree with lots of things that I've said. I don't know, and you could tell me why. I'm not afraid. Yes, over here. Yeah. I'll repeat your comment because they can't hear you behind. Yeah, anti-Semitism is alive and well. People have termed it the oldest disease in the world. But there's no doubt that the actions of today are increasing anti-Semitism. And if only Israel was able to portray its situation better. And what I say is, by allowing foreign correspondents to see for themselves that the Hamas is using civilians as shields, that Hamas is using schools, hospitals, and mosques to fight out of, that Israel is attacking people who are Hamas, and other people who are being killed are collateral damage, we'll call it, or civilian casualties. But since Israel can't tell that story, The only story the world is getting is from Hamas, with little children with blood on their heads and holding teddy bears. It really is sad. I mean, no person with a heart could not sympathize with a child holding a teddy bear with a bloody bandage and having his mother and father killed right in front of him. How could you argue with that? And Israel is presenting nothing in exchange. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah. Okay, the question was, the Palestinians who live in squalor in the Gaza, how come their billionaire brothers don't help them out? Well, first of all, the question is, what do you mean by brothers? Do you mean the other rich Arab countries? But they don't consider themselves brothers. Remember that there's 22 Arab states. Muslim countries, there's way more. But they don't look, you can't say that just as Jews in the world care for one another, that the Arabs are the same thing. They're not. They don't see themselves as brothers at all. They look at their individual nationalities and their individual religions and families, and traditionally speaking, the Arab world, except for the top political leaders for political reasons, say, "Oh, we're one great nation," but they don't see themselves like that. And you could say, how come? Let me just get off the subject for 2 seconds, okay? Yesterday, I took a bike ride. I mean, many of you know how fitness is important to me. I did a bike ride to the end of Montreal Island. If you go down Notre Dame Street on the East End, there's hundreds of tents and people living in tents. And wouldn't you say, well, Montreal's a rich city. There's billionaires here. There's millionaires here. How come the people are living in tents? So you could say the same thing just about in any Western country. You have ultra rich people and you have very poor people. And how come they don't share? Because that's what human beings have been like this since we began. So a lot of money has gone into the Gaza Strip, lots of it. It just hasn't been distributed to the people who need it. The cost of making all those tunnels is huge. All that money could have gone to the welfare of the people. It was sent for that purpose, yeah. Or, yeah, it was sent for that purpose, yeah. Right. About half the people in Jordan are Palestinians. Well, what is true is that there was an attempt by Palestinians living in Jordan to overthrow the monarchy, which was defeated. That attempt led to the exile of the Palestinian Liberation Organization to Lebanon from Jordan. So that's how the PLO got kicked out of Jordan. They moved to Lebanon. Once they got into Lebanon, they then started to stir up trouble, leading to the Lebanese civil war indirectly between the Christians and the Muslims, because the Palestinians, when they came to Lebanon, they had weapons. And they said, you know what? We are going to lend our support to Muslims in Lebanon who want to overthrow the balance of power in the country. And that's what started the civil war in 1976. And it ended only in 1991 when Syria invaded Lebanon and put an end to the civil war. So again, there's such a thing as collective guilt, and it's not something that is right to say that the Palestinians did this or that, they did that. I mean, you know, there's, like I said, somewhere around the Palestinian population in Israel today, meaning Israel, Gaza, West Bank, and within Israel itself, is somewhere between 5 and 6 million people. And then you've got another 5 or 6 million people living in the Middle East who are also Palestinians, living in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, etc. So you can't put your finger and say they do this and they do that and they do this and they do that. Obviously, it's not all of them that do everything. So, you know, but they have suffered from terrible leadership from 1900 till the present. They haven't had any kind of leadership that has solved more problems than they made. They've had awful leadership. And when you have awful leadership, it results in awful results, you know, and that's just their situation. That's just you know, their, I won't call it destiny, but that's what's happened to them. Anyone else? We'll see here. Yes, madame, here. Oh, how come that? So the question is, how was this allowed to happen? Well, Mr. Netanyahu has an answer. The answer is we're going to hold a commission of inquiry after the war is over. Notice the after the war is over part. So who decides when the war is over? Mr. Netanyahu. So you can have no commission of inquiry, which will find all kinds of fault in him and his government, so long as the war is over and he decides when it's over. People have resigned from the military. Top officers have resigned. Top intelligence people have resigned. Mr. Netanyahu has taken zero blame for something that happened. You know, the buck stops here. He's supposed to be the head of the government. He's supposed to take some responsibility. He took zero responsibility. Some people say, I don't like, you know, Trump uses that term, some say, but that all of the soldiers who were supposed to be watching the Gaza border were sent to the West Bank to protect the settlers. And that's why there was nobody at the switch. There were some reports by scouts saying that something is going on in Gaza. We don't know exactly what, but we see they're doing something. All of these scouts were women. And the women were not believed because they're women, and because we'll call it the weight in the Israeli army has moved towards religious Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox, but Orthodox soldiers and Orthodox officers. And these people just don't regard women in the same way as other people do. And so their opinion or their observations were dismissed. And, you know, if they had a commission of inquiry, it would look into these things, but they don't have one. So that's that. Yeah, of course. Different, you know, some were able to defend themselves and some weren't. Some were calling, you know, this Amir Tibon, he got a call and he ran down from Tel Aviv. He took his gun and he said, I'm going to help. And there were no army was there when they were there. You know, yes, there was a music festival. They did have some security, but the security was overwhelmed and they were killed, the security guards. Yes. Did you want to say something? Right. 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 Oh. So were you able to hear what she said? So what she said was that she heard a well-known author give a talk at the Temple Emmanuel and saying that basically Netanyahu did not believe that there would be any threat from Gaza, and he was much more concentrated on the external threats to Israel and of course on the West Bank than he was to Gaza. And the reason is because he made an agreement with Qatar to send money to Gaza, billions of dollars, so that the people would be looked after, number one. And he also, you didn't mention this, but he also allowed some tens of thousands of Gazan workers to cross the border every day to work in Israel in agriculture and in construction and get paid decent Israeli wages. What's a decent Israeli wage? 100 US dollars a day, a day. So with that money going back into Gaza, that $100 was good for a family of 10 people to keep them going. And so he felt then that that Gaza would not be a problem. Now, this is part of his strategy. Netanyahu's strategy was, number one, we do not want a Palestinian state. And what we don't want is that the people from Gaza and the people from the West Bank should somehow get together. So what he did was he himself built up Hamas so that Hamas would be a rival to the Palestinian Authority based in the West Bank. So his idea was a divide and conquer idea, very common in world history. So by keeping the two sides apart, there would be no chance that the two sides would unite to get together to demand a Palestinian state because each would be a rival of the other. That was his strategy. Clearly, he underestimated Hamas is what happened. Yeah. Anyone else? So listen, I want to wish you all an easy fast if you're fasting this week. Good holidays. And let's hope against hope that this agreement will be accepted by the two sides and there will be a ceasefire and the hostages will be released. That would be the best results. So thank you very much again.